Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly and wow, it has been a while since I posted my last video. I did plan to post this one at the end of 2024 along with a couple of other videos before the end of the year, and unfortunately it just didn't happen. I traveled for the holidays and I got pretty busy with all of that, and then my husband had surgery and just a lot of things going on, so it just didn't happen, which I'm totally fine with, but we are back now and I'm excited to get going with all the videos that I want to catch up on. I've already filmed my 2025 reading journal setup, and that one should be coming after this one, but I did already have this video filmed and edited, so I just wanted to do my voiceover for it and get this one posted, and then I'll get going on the rest of my 2025 video. So I'm sorry if all these videos feel like they're coming out of order, especially since I'm posting this one and then the 2025 one, and then I'll probably be going back to October, November, and December videos for 2024, which I don't know how long that will take. But then of course I'll also have my January reads for this year somewhere in there, hopefully after, but I don't know. So sorry if everything feels chaotic and out of order, but you know, honestly, I should have seen that coming with the way that my brain works, and I just really thought I would be much less chaotic, but that's just not in my nature, I guess. Regardless, one last housekeeping note that I want to mention here before I get started talking about my spreads is that my husband and I were messing around with the settings on my camera, and I think that we thought we found a good place for the settings to be, and then I went back and looked at this footage while I was editing it, and I'm really unhappy with how it turned out in terms of lighting and the contrast and all of that. So I tried to do a little bit of editing on the actual color balance and everything of these clips, but unfortunately I couldn't make it look exactly the way I would want it to look. But I do think that I fixed everything by the next video. So I apologize if the quality of these clips is not really the best that it could be, but yeah, I do think that I fixed it for the next video. So hopefully it doesn't last beyond this video. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about September of 2024. This month I went back to getting inspiration from the full moon, and that's mostly because we finally reached it. The harvest moon is here. The harvest moon is the only one that I know of that moves between 2 different months depending on circumstances. So the harvest moon is whichever full moon lies closest to the autumn equinox that year. And in 2024, that happened to be September, but other years it can also be October. So since September was the harvest moon, I decided to make my cover page very autumnal and harvest inspired. Basically, I found this Marigona Suli art sticker that has like this vegetable cart that looks like it would be at a market after a big harvest or at like a harvest festival maybe, and that's what I based my whole collage off of. I used these really warm toned doilies from an Amazon pack and some letter stickers that I made myself on craft paper, as well as some washi tapes and different paper ephemera as well, and then I also used these mushroom stamps from Hobby Lobby. I'll try to link everything that I have links for down in the description box if you're looking for anything specific. And on the right side, I used some frames from Journal Say to lay out across the page, and I wrote the titles of the books that I read onto those frames, and I kind of just layered them with these brown papers and more of those mushroom stamps and another, like the other half of that orange doily basically. I also use these like little wooden letter stamps to write out Harvest Moon and books read so that it, you know, it's nice and labeled. And then we're gonna move into talking about my books. So the first book that I read in September is Twilight Falls by Juno Black. This is the 4th book in the Shady Hollow series. This series so far has followed Vera Vixen, who is a fox, and she's a reporter in this town of Shady Hollow, and she works mostly like light, fluffy pieces, but in the first book she's covering a murder, and now all of the subsequent books after that, she's covering murders in this cozy little town of a bunch of talking animals, basically. There's not much else to say about the plot of these books. The Shady Hollow books are really cozy and not much happens in them. They're not super high stakes. Obviously, it's a bunch of animals living in a forest town together and going about their lives, and so there's really not much to go into in terms of plot and things. There's just a murder mystery, and that's pretty much it. After reading a few romances and more like a little bit higher fantasy last month, this one was such a nice palate cleanser for me. This series is just so comforting and cozy. Multiple times I found myself like wistfully daydreaming about living in Shady Hollow. Vera's life, aside from the murders that she's always trying to solve, just seems so relaxing. It's the kind of life that I would want to live. This one, compared to the other ones, I felt much more engaged in, and I think it could partially be because I read this one on its own. When I read the first 3 books, I read them like all in a row, and I don't know why I did that, because these are really not sitting at the edge of your seat type of like thrilling mysteries. These are obviously very cozy, very formulaic. You know, you kind of know what to expect going into them. And so reading 3 of them in a row was not a smart idea, honestly. So I'm glad that I read this one on its own, and I think I was much more engaged in it because of that. I do think this one still went on a little bit too long for me. I think it could have been cut down, but other than that, nice and cozy, relaxing. Not much else to say. I gave it 4 stars. I really liked this one, and I like these as kind of a nice little escape, like read it over the weekend kind of thing after a stressful week at work. And I kind of view these books as that type of palate cleanser. Next up, I read the 4th and final book in the Love Light Farms series. This one is Business Casual, and this series is by B.K. Borison. This 4th book is following Nova, who is a tattoo artist who is setting up her new tattoo studio, and Charlie, who is a guy in finance who lives in New York City, but he visits Love Light Farms often because the main character in the first book is his stepsister, and they have like a sweet sibling relationship, and so he visits Love Light Farms often. And so this is kind of a love story between, not kind of, this is a love story between Charlie and Nova. And I hate this, but I have to speak my truth. I know, I swear everybody loves this entire series, so please, if you are interested in a series like this, like a nice, relaxing, cozy little small town romance, you probably will like this one. I usually love small town romance. This series there's just something about it that isn't working for me. The first book in this series is a huge all-time favorite 5-star romance, and one of the only friends to lovers romance that I love, and every book from there on out for some reason just has not worked for me, and this one is no different. I did like that there wasn't a lot of conflict between Nova and Charlie. I do get tired of fights and third act breakups, so I like when I read just a nice natural progression of a relationship with more what feels like normal challenges and hurdles. But I do feel like when a book is structured that way, it does need to be engaging in a different way, and I think this one just wasn't engaging enough for me. I felt like Nova drove me crazy. She kept repeating, so many people have given up the things they love to get me here. But I just kept thinking, like, who and what? Who gave up what to get you where you are? She kept saying her brother Beckett gave up so much to get her to where she is, but Beckett seems really happy. He's a farmer and he loves his job, and I don't really understand what she views as a sacrifice that people have made for her. I just felt like there wasn't enough like real stakes, and so I just couldn't sympathize with her kind of wallowing the whole time. And maybe that's insensitive, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't find the sympathy for the stuff that she was dealing with. I felt like she should have just been honest with her brother. She kept hiding her tattoo studio from him and the progress she was making, and I didn't understand like where that perfectionism was coming from. I don't think it was delved into enough for me to like really grasp it. I think there were a couple of moments that I felt really, I don't know, cringed out by. Charlie calling Nova Girl. I felt like there was some inside joke that I was missing out on. Like, I didn't understand where that nickname came from and like what it was referencing. I don't know. I didn't really get it. And so I don't know. But I think I'm the only person in the world, I swear. So please don't take my review with any more than the tiniest grain of salt. For this spread, I just used this really beautiful summery sticker sheet from Artimation Co. on Etsy, and then I used some origami paper from Muji. So I gave Twilight Falls 4 stars, and I gave Business Casual 2.5. Next up, I read The Art of Catching Feelings by Alicia Thompson. This author gets me with her covers every single time. I bought this book because I was actually going on a baseball trip with my husband for his 30th birthday, and I just thought it was a perfect excuse to buy this gorgeous cover on a book, and I decided to read it at the baseball games that we went to when we went to Boston for my husband's birthday. So this book is following Daphne, and she is not a baseball fan, but she has a background in broadcasting, and she ends up at a baseball game in a bad mental space and ends up heckling one of the players, and he ends up crying, and so she reaches out to him on social media later to apologize, and she forgets to identify herself as the heckler in her message, and the player, Chris, ends up kind of building a relationship with her over DMs, and eventually they end up kind of talking in person as well, and it gets really messy, but you know, it's a romance, so they do fall in love at the end. If you can hear Pebbles purring next to the microphone, I am so sorry. She has decided that it's very important that she stay next to me, so that's what's going on. And Mouse is playing with a jingle toy outside, so just lots of cat mayhem going on as usual. I thought this book was really cute. It was obviously, okay, I say obviously, it was kind of silly. There were a lot of things that ended up happening that I was like, okay, this would never happen in real life. And also I feel like athletes are so careful now to not be catfished and things like that. And Chris was just, he was really sweet, but he ignored so many red flags, and he should have known that something was off. He thankfully was actually talking to a girl that he really did like, and she had genuine motivations, but he could have been easily catfished, and it was kind of hard to read. It was a little bit uncomfortable to watch happen, honestly. I think for me, this had the perfect vibe because I was reading this at a baseball game, so obviously that worked out perfect for me in terms of atmosphere. And I think Daphne was a pretty decent character. I think I saw some criticism where she took way too long to reveal who she was to him. I did understand her anxiety about revealing who she was, even though I think she should have done it a lot earlier, but it didn't bother me too much, honestly. All of the sort of silliness aside, I thoroughly enjoyed reading this story. I will be displaying this book pretty often in the summertime, I think. It'll be facing forward on my bookshelves for sure. I gave this 4 stars, and I used this really beautiful spring Margona Sully art sticker sheet, and I also had these kind of like vinyl baseball stickers laying around from, I don't even remember what for. I think I just had them laying around, and they're from Michael's, but I thought they were really cute. I also cut the doily into a baseball diamond shape. I don't know if that really translates on page, but that was my goal, and that idea was not from me. That was my husband's idea. Unfortunately, my camera cut off at that point and I didn't notice, so the footage kind of just clips right there, but I do go back and do a flip through, so you'll be able to see that spread in its entirety once I do that. Okay, next up, I read A Kingdom of Fire and Fate by Holly Renee. This is technically the 4th book in the Kingdom of Stars and Shadows series. The first 3 books in this series actually follow a different couple. They follow Adara and Evren, but this 4th book is following a new couple that are introduced in maybe the 2nd book, I think, in the series. So this book is following Talia and Soren. And because this is fantasy romance, I kind of feel like I can't say much more without spoiling the other 3. But I will say that I really loved the first 3 books, honestly. I think the first book for me is like a 5-star solid, fun, I would say 4th wing level quality of fantasy romance. So if you're not into like kind of that style of fantasy romance, then you wouldn't like these, but I definitely am into that style. So I love the first book, and the second book was like a 3-star for me, and then the third book was a 4-star, so it was still up there and pretty good in my opinion. I didn't like this one as much as the other 3, unfortunately, and I am so bummed about it. I feel like I'm asking myself, where in the world did Soren's personality go? He was such a fun and goofy character in the other books, and I was looking forward to seeing the juxtaposition between that goofy side of him and how serious he would be when he's alone with Talia. And it turns out that he's just not a fun, goofy character anymore. He's strictly serious and nothing else. He doesn't have his charm from the other books, but he also doesn't have the intensity that Evren has in the other books. He's just serious, and that's pretty much it. I didn't feel their chemistry at all. There's a scene in one of the other books that kind of shows some of their chemistry, but it feels completely depleted in this book, and I just unfortunately was not into it. I think it was fine as kind of an aside to the series, but overall I felt like it was unnecessary at the end of the day. If it was going to be this generic, I just kind of felt meh about it. If it had been a banger of a romance, then I think it would have been a great addition, but I think because it wasn't, that's what made it feel like, oh, why did you need to add a 4th book into the series? Like, just keep it a trilogy and it would be fine. I still love Holly Renee's writing style, and I'm excited to get started on the Veiled Kingdom series. I already have the first book, but I think that happens with authors. I think there's always a couple of books that just aren't for you. The ones that don't have those books are just your favorite authors, you know? The second book on this spread is Bunker Hill by Nathaniel Philbrick, and the subtitle is A City, a Siege, a Revolution. And I mentioned that I was on a trip to Boston with my husband at this time, and I picked this book up while we were there, and I started reading it immediately because I realized that I had no clue what was going on in Boston pre-revolution, really. And so I was interested in picking it up. Obviously, this is a very niche book. Not everyone, or barely anyone, probably in my audience especially, is going to be interested in this nonfiction book about a specific time period in Boston. But I picked it up and I read it and I journaled about it. So I'm going to talk about it just quickly. So this is a nonfiction book about Boston in 1775. So the American Revolution breaks out in 1776 officially, but this is sort of the lead up to the revolution and what was going on in Boston, which was a really important catalyst for the revolution happening in the first place. So that's what this book covers. What I found that I loved most about this book is less so about the actual revolution itself and more so that it focused so heavily on the people that were living in and around Boston at that time and how all of this was affecting them and how their actions were impacting the introduction into the war, basically. And I just found that so fascinating, and the storytelling was so well done, and I just never have read a history book that I got into this much. It actually kickstarted a really big interest in reading more nonfiction in the future. So yeah, I loved this book so much. So I gave A Kingdom of Fire and Fate 3 stars and Bunker Hill 5. For this spread, I mainly just stuck to this Marigona Sully art sticker sheet with these like spooky black and pink fantasy type characters, and pulled in some different washi tapes from Simply Gilded and some origami papers to match these stickers. And last but not least, I finally got around to reading the second book in the Emily Wilde series by Heather Fawcett. So I read Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands, and this was a hugely anticipated read for me, so I'm super glad that I finally got to it. So this book follows Emily Wilde and Wendell Bambleby, who are the main characters in the first book, and it follows them on this journey that sort of happens out of the results from the last book, basically. And so there's not too much I can say without spoiling, but I will say that a couple of new characters were introduced, and you get to see some different types of lands in this one, basically. I was only slightly nervous that this wouldn't live up to book one, and I absolutely think that it held its own. I love when a book does the opposite of put me in a reading slump, when a book just catapults me into being so excited to read that I just speed read books afterwards because I'm having so much fun, and that's exactly what this book did for me. If you'll remember, earlier in the year, back in the winter, I read the first book in this series, and I was so pleasantly surprised by the fact that that book had so much snow in it, and I just so happened to be reading it in one of the only snow days that we had up here, and it happened again. I did not know. I didn't open this book before I started reading it, so I had no idea that this book was set in mid-September/early October, and it just jump-started my fall reading in the most perfect way. I cannot believe that I accidentally timed this book perfectly with this season, exactly like I did with the first one. I feel a little bit psychic, I'm not gonna lie. Emily and Wendell are so adorable, just as they were in the first story. I loved getting to know more about Wendell's background in this one. And I mentioned that a couple of new characters were introduced. Emily's niece was introduced as an addition to the story, and I thought she was really sweet. And I also enjoyed the progression of the department head character. There is an introduction to the department head of the department that Emily and Wendell work in at the university. And I was nervous when I realized that these people, and I don't want to spoil anything, but these people do join them on their journey. That's a little bit of a spoiler, but it really isn't that much. I was looking forward to seeing Emily and Wendell on their own, but I will say, and if this has been scaring you, the new characters worked so well for me. I liked their interactions with Emily and Wendell, but they didn't cause any kind of like backsliding in terms of feeling like you wanted more character development elsewhere, and they really held their own as their own characters, if that makes sense. And I think that their progression in the story really added to it rather than taking away from it. So I was really happy with that. I will say that I thought Emily's character was slightly subdued this time compared to book 1, and I didn't feel like her expertise in the field of fairy studies shined as much as before. It was definitely referenced, especially from the perspective of the department head character, but it wasn't always shown in depth on the page. So that was a little bit of like a slight, not disappointment, but I was like, oh, okay. So in this story, Wendell is a little bit sick throughout, and I felt like that dulled his character a little bit slightly, and I do think that was purposeful, but I kind of missed his like bubbly, crazy, like Howl's Moving Castle vibe character, but it wasn't so bad that I like disliked it fully, if that makes sense. But I did look back at the end of the book and think, oh, okay, we were kind of missing a little bit of that Wendell vibe in this one. But overall, I felt like it was still pretty much perfect, and I did end up giving it 5 stars. So what can I say? It was still a huge win for me, obviously. But I cannot wait for book number 3. I'm really excited, although I'm not a huge fan of the cover of that one. The first 2 books are probably the most beautiful covers that I own, but that third one, I don't know. It's got a blue cover, and I just don't know how I feel about that. I am so happy with how this spread turned out. I used some origami paper that I found on Amazon, and on top of that, I layered these really beautiful mushroom fairy cottagecore vibe stickers from Mushy Works. I'll link those down below because they are so cute and perfect for this spread. And that was pretty much the entirety of this spread. It was really just those stickers, that paper, and then I also used some mushroom washi tape from Simply Gilded, but this one is not available anymore, which is so sad because it's my favorite washi like ever. But I just love how all of this came together and how it looks with the cover. Just like, I don't know, I opened to this spread and that makes me so happy. And I think my hand lettering turned out okay this time as well. So I'm kind of okay with that too. And that, my friends, is everything that I read in the month of September. So thank you so much for joining me for this video. You can see that I didn't do this flip through until after Christmas, and I have Christmas nails that have grown out and it's a nightmare, but whatever. Here is my flip through after I filled everything out with pen, which took me, honestly, a little bit of time, not gonna lie. But I'm really happy with how a lot of these spreads turned out. I think these might be some of my favorite of the whole year. I can definitely see a lot of improvement in my collaging and just my kind of laying out of these spreads, I guess, if that makes sense. So I'm really happy with them, and this Emily Wilde spread is probably one of my favorites of all time. So I really appreciate you all watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.